So, Steve, you got the chance to try out one of the coolest looking Switch 2 exclusives, being Orbitals, and you got the chance to try this with someone you know, which is quite pivotal to a co-op experience. I really just want to learn a lot more about this game because it looks so cool and nails that 80s anime aesthetic more than any other game has ever attempted. So, I guess my first question is, like, we've seen footage of it, but when playing, how well does that style hold up?
It holds up incredibly well, John. I am a huge fan of retro anime. I came up watching classic series like Inuyasha and Ranma and Project Eiko and stuff like that. And this feels as though they just kind of took that and turned it into a fully 3D game. It captures the feeling of retro anime in a way that I don't really think any other game ever has. And I think that that's one of the core strengths of Orbitals. Obviously, gameplay is everything, and we'll get to that in a minute, but the vibe of this game is entirely unique. I actually had a chance to talk to someone from Kepler, the publisher for the game. It's made by Shapeform, but really importantly here, the animation was all done by a Japanese anime studio, Studio Masket. They were founded in 2017, but they literally went back to the original like 1980s and 90s animation techniques. Like they threw out their entire animation pipeline and started over, like, drawing cells one by one for the animations in this game. And that to me is just the coolest thing ever. Like the fact that they did this level of effort for this game. And it really shows, like, in every character animation, every single thing. This isn't like emulating the style of the time. It literally is going back to it.
We've had lots of games try and do the anime aesthetic, like Ni no Kuni came pretty close, and it's a fairly common style these days, but nothing really nails it like Orbitals is doing right now. Like, this literally looks like the cutscenes themselves are straight out of the 80s, like you were saying, but also the gameplay. Transitioning that to cel-shaded 3D is simply gorgeous. And they're using really cool animation techniques by making the frame rate lower in places. It just feels right. In a way that I've never really seen in a game before, which is super, super cool.
Yeah, I was really surprised because I was expecting Orbitals, like once I went hands-on with it, to be a bit like Demon Tides or some of these games that put like a 2D sprite on a 3D plane and kind of, fake the animation a bit, where this is actually 3D models. Like you can rotate completely around them. It's not sprites that are shifting as the camera moves to create kind of a more retro aesthetic. These are characters that I believe are animated somewhere around 24 FPS to give you that feeling of like retro anime. It looks and feels really good. And from a gameplay perspective, it also controls very nicely.
Well, I guess let's talk a bit more about the gameplay then. The obvious comparison is games like It Takes Two and Split Fiction, because it's a big co-op game where you're working together solving puzzles. But how apt is that comparison, though, when you're actually playing?
I think there are ways in which it is quite the apt comparison and ways in which it doesn't do it justice. With games like Split Fiction and It Takes Two, you usually select a character. You're playing as one of the two characters, and those characters have predefined roles within each level, within the story of the game. Whereas with Orbitals, whether you're playing as Maki or Omura, you can take on either role at any time, and either player can be either character. So, player one is not always Maki by default. Player one can be Omura, player two can be Maki, or vice versa. And even depending on which character you choose, you're still able to say, there are missions in which one might pilot a ship while the other mans the guns, or one may have like a grappling hook while another has a device that shoots water to cool things off. And no character is bound to any of those decisions. You and your co-op partner can decide on the fly, like, hey, I'd rather pilot the ship this time. I'd rather be on the guns. I'd rather shoot water. So you're very flexible in who takes on what role to complete what part of the level, where games like It Takes Two typically lock player one or player two into specific roles. And if you want to have that opposite experience, you have to, swap controllers.
Yeah, and those games, It Takes Two and Split Fiction, they have a lot of variety in them, but the core gameplay is kind of there throughout the entire game. It feels like Orbitals is constantly doing something new. Like, it's hard to see just one tangent where it's all the same. From the footage I've seen anyway, where it's just always like, here's a mini game, here's a new way to play, here's something else you can do. Is it just like constantly new stuff all the time?
So the demo I played was 20 minutes, and within it, there was a surprising amount of variety. Like it opens up on you having to do some basic ship repairs. So you're traveling across your ship, you're finding various components that you have to fix. From there it transitions to like a literal spacewalk sequence where you're flying through with a little jetpack over to another broken down space station type of thing. You have to guide a robot through a series of puzzles, and it feels like beat to beat. The gameplay loop is constantly changing. And I think that that's really cool because it's not just like, oh, this is a platformer. One section you're modifying gravity to send your partner flying through a level using some pretty advanced platforming stuff, where you have to get your timings down. You might be using a tractor beam to guide someone across some hazards where they can go up and down and you can go left and right. But then you have like space dogfight segments. Like there's a lot of variety in here. And like I said, my demo was only 20 minutes, but I think I spotted like 5 or 6 different gameplay elements in that time. So if this holds up, yeah, I feel like there's going to be a ton of variety in the final game.
A cool part of that too is like when you play co-op games with someone who's less experienced at a certain genre, like sometimes they struggle or feel bad about that. But when it's shaking up so much, it's unlikely one person's going to be like the master of it every time. So that feels like it's just going to be a nice fit for that kind of environment. But we know a lot more about this game too. Like we know it supports game share. You can play it online. There's local. Local feels like the way to play, but playing online is also very valid as well. But yeah, it's just nice to have that flexibility to how you play the game. But let's talk a little bit more about the general feel as well. So when it comes to the controls of Orbitals, is it feeling tight? Does every different sub mini game feel like as polished as the others?
The best compliment that I can give to Orbitals in terms of its controls and mechanics is that I never thought about them. I was never
amazing,
consciously considering, are these good enough? Are these, are they responsive enough? I just was immediately locked in playing the game. Everything felt responsive enough to where it was not something that was a concern at any point during my my short demo with the game. And every minigame feels very very carefully crafted, very considered in terms of its design. None of them felt like superfluous or extra difficult, but it is a game, like you mentioned, it's a great co-op game. It's definitely ideal for couch co-op because this is a game where you're going to be talking to your partner. You're going to be communicating like, hey, I need you to do this, or, talking back and forth with whoever you're choosing to play with about this. One cool thing that we didn't touch on either is that, there's basically no scenario in which the second player has to have a copy of the game. There's even like an eShop friend client that someone who doesn't have the game can download to play it, in full visual fidelity if they don't want to do game share, which I think is just another really cool addition to the whole co-op setup for this.
Yeah, the more you look at it, the more further away it feels from Split Fiction, because obviously it's another co-op game. But that's really where the comparisons seem to end. There's a lot of differences in tone, in setting, in humor, in style, in the things you're doing. I know September's a very busy month, but this feels essential for Switch 2 owners, especially those who have the chance to play with someone else.
It really does, and it's really important to note that this is another third-party game that is fully on the card. It is a physical release, no game key card, just full-on physical release. So I feel like it's more important than ever to call that out. But yeah, it is very different in tone to games like Split Fiction and stuff like that. I obviously didn't get to see too much of the story behind why Maki and Omura are living the lives that they're living. But there is kind of like a implied sense of why maybe, they wove into the narrative why you might respawn when you die. They start to explain that in the beginning of the game. And it is one of those things that I think is a great gameplay element because, like you said, if someone you're playing with is not really an expert or not really a gamer per se, dying isn't going to reset you all the way back. And that's true in Split Fiction as well. But the fact that this is more of like a 80s/90s anime themed sci-fi space opera kind of deal really sets it apart because a lot of these co-op games are grounded in a bit more realism, like people from an ordinary human life go on to do something extraordinary seems to be the theme of a lot of these games, like It Takes Two and Split Fiction, where this is fully embracing the idea that this is just anime and you've got space aliens and out there designs, and it gives you a lot of freedom to make more fantastical things, in my opinion.
Not important, but did you play dubbed or subbed?
We were not given the option. The demo was dubbed, and I'm happy to say that it is like, it also strikes that balance of being like kind of 80s, 90s corny in a way, like in terms of the dub, like they capture the vibe of if you were watching like an old VHS or a DVD with like an old dub on it. It feels that way. And Maki and Omura constantly banter, like they're constantly talking to each other as you're playing, like, you know, giving each other a hard time about maybe failing at something, or just kind of chatting back and forth about, you know, like there's one scene in which they're you have to go left and right. It's almost like a Mario Party minigame where you go left and right on a platform to steer the platform, but both players have to agree on the direction or else it won't move. And they're making puns the entire time about the direction of it, and, you know, trying to one up each other with jokes about the platform, which sounds kind of corny on its face, but it adds a lot to an otherwise pretty simplistic gameplay mechanic, because it's just fun to hear them talking to each other about what they're doing.
Totally. It sounds cool that it's also like taking localization and making it feel more 80s as well. Because, you know, in that sort of time of anime dubs, you would get a lot of like puns and just that kind of humor that maybe wasn't like in the original text, but they found like a fun way to put it in there. And also, like nowadays, there's like an anime voice, which is very uniform in most dubs. And it sounds like they're going more towards that sort of 80s style where it hadn't quite found itself. And I liked it like that.
Yeah, you know, anime from the 80s and 90s was almost overly expressive in terms of both, you know, the character art and the line delivery. Like they were trying to match the crazy faces that anime characters make with their deliveries. And it definitely feels like they're trying to capture that vibe in Orbitals. Like, because Maki and Omura are very animated. They have like a series of cute little emotes and stuff, but 80s anime characters had a different feel to them. And I agree that like modern anime has this more, I don't want to say generic, but kind of more settled tone to it. It's a bit more serious than things were in the 80s when they weren't really sure who their audience was. So the voice actors got to have a little more fun with the characters.
But this game sounds absolutely unmissable. Visual delight, it's a style that we just don't see in other games. And in terms of what it's doing with gameplay, there's really nothing else like it. You can compare it to Split Fiction, but I think it's just doing really different things. So it's completely rad to hear that it's holding up as well as it does. And we're only like, 2 months out from launch now?
Yeah, we're really close. And like you said earlier, I feel like first impression is that this is indeed an unmissable game, particularly, obviously, for Switch 2 owners. This is an exclusive, it's third party, it's physical on cart, it's co-op. The list of things that are great about this game just are long already after only 20 minutes. And if it can hold that same energy that I got in those first 20 minutes for the entirety of the playthrough, this is going to be a game that I think is going to be recommended on a lot of Game of the Year lists.
Man, yeah, I cannot wait to play the entire thing. But Steve, thank you so much for talking us through your time with Orbitals. We will talk about this game a bunch more on the channel when it comes out. I'm sure we'll be talking about it way after that as well. So keep it tuned on GVG for a lot more on Orbitals, and until then, we will catch you next time. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.